Hello, everyone, dear GCI members, young leaders, and sustainability advocates joining us from around the world. Welcome to GCI Sustain 360 48 Hours Race to Sustainability, a global initiative of the 2026 GCI Sustainability Commission. I am Amael Aubert from GCI Switzerland, and I have the honor of serving as the 2026 GCI Vice President assigned to Europe. GCI Sustain 360 brings together members and organizations across the world to learn, take action, and create measurable impact around some of the most important sustainability challenges facing our communities. Today, we are exploring a challenge that affects every individual, businesses, organization, and communities: the way we produce, consume, and dispose of resources. Our theme is circular economy and waste reduction, and the topic of today's conversation is waste is a resource, unlocking the value of circular economy. For many years, our economies have largely followed a linear model. We extract natural resources, manufacture products, use them, and eventually discard them, throw them away. This approach has contributed to increasing waste, pressure on natural resources, pollution, and greenhouse emission. The circular economy presents a different approach. It asks us to prevent waste from being created in the first place, extend the life of products and buildings, recover valuable material, and rethink the system behind production and consumption. Today's conversation will help us understand what the circular economy truly means, how it can be applied in buildings and organizations, and what GCI members and young leaders can do to advance circular practices in their communities. It is my pleasure to welcome today's guest, Ayşe Gizem-Taş. Ayşe is an architect and sustainability consultant who helps buildings and the people behind them move from sustainability goals to decisions that deliver practical and lasting results. Over the past decade, she has worked on more than 40 green building and decarbonization projects across Turkey, Europe, and the Middle East. Her experience includes green building certification such as LEED, BREEAM WELL, and Fitwel, as well as life cycle assessment, embodied carbon, energy and water efficiency, occupant health and comfort, circular economy, and sustainable procurement. Much of her work involves translating technical building data into practical insight that can guide finance, strategy, regulation, and organizational decision-making. Her approach is shaped by technical standards as well as regenerative leadership, permaculture, and system thinking. She regularly encourages organizations to ask why before deciding how. Ayşe is also a member and project contributor at GCI Maltepe. She remains active across climate and built environment communities and initiatives, including the Chamber of Architects, the Green Collar Women Association, Terradu, and Climate Fresk. Ayşe, thank you for joining us today. Welcome to the GCI Sustainable 360 48 Hours Race to Sustainability. Ayşe, how would you explain the circular economy to someone hearing the term for the first time?
Well, hi again. I actually usually start with nature because nature has no landfill. In a healthy ecosystem, what one process leaves behind becomes food for the next. Leaves fall and turn into soil, and nothing is actually wasted. It just changes form and re-enters a cycle. Our job as humans is often not to force these cycles, but to remove the barriers we ourselves put in their way. And we create a lot of barriers. Like we glue materials together so they cannot be separated. We add chemicals that make them toxic. We design products that cannot be repaired, and we build supply chains with no way back. So for me, circular economy is simply designing products, materials, buildings, and even organizations so that value stays in the system instead of being destroyed after the single use. But circularity has to have an order. Like first, we need to reduce. We need to question whether we need the thing at all, because honestly, we consume far too much. Then we reuse or repair or adapt for as long as possible. And only then recycling, because recycling still costs energy, water, and transport. So it often also lowers the quality of the material. That order actually matters because recycling asks what we should do with the waste. Circularity asks why we created it in the first place.
Thank you very much. And tell me now, how is it different from the traditional take, make, and throw away model that we experiment in most of modern society?
Yeah, the linear model is just, you can think of it as a straight line. We take raw materials, make a product, a material, use it, and throw it away. And every step loses the value and also creates carbon emissions as well. So circularity bends that line into a loop. So the end of one life becomes the start of another. The linear economy treats the planet as a infinite warehouse, like it's an infinite bin, and it is neither.
Thank you for making that distinction very clear. So, circular economy is therefore not only about managing waste, it's about changing the system that creates waste in the first place. Um, is recycling, though, enough to solve our growing waste problem?
Well, no, because recycling is of course necessary, but it comes at the very end, after something has already been designed, bought, used, and thrown away. By then, most of the chances to prevent the waste are already gone. Concrete can be clearest example. Like when we demolish it, it is usually crushed into aggregate for road base. We call that recycling, but it's really downcycling because the cement that made it structural and carried almost all of its carbon is gone for good. You cannot recycle that back. The only way to keep that value is actually not to pour it in the first place or keep the structure we already have. And even where recycling does work, we often build only half of it. For example, in Turkey, the new deposit machines for plastic bottles took off immediately. But the common complaint is that the machines fill up in no time because the reverse logistics behind them were never sized for that use, or not yet, maybe. It's the same in our lead projects. We put the bins, build the waste room, train the reusers, but none of it holds without an operational routine. We need someone whose actual job is to move that separated waste every day or every week. Without that, the chain breaks at the last link and it all just gets mixed again.
It's a very good example, especially about the concrete, because I do work for a construction company and we partner up with a startup where we actually used the concrete from demolished buildings. We imprison some CO2 in it, and then we reuse it to make some new concrete. But circularity begins much earlier through better design, reduced consumption, repair, reuse, and a much longer product life. So it's a completely different way of thinking, of designing, and of putting things into production. And I think that is very important, but most people don't actually know that it's that early stage that actually matter the most. So
Completely.
tell me, what does it mean to treat waste as a resource? What what does it mean in a different way than what we do in most of the case today?
Yeah, for this one, I just wanted to give a personal aspect. Like my father was a sculptor, and he would look at the offcuts of marble, the quarries throw aside, and see not waste, but an unfinished sculpture. So growing up around that changed how I look at materials, actually. It carried into how I trained too. In architecture school, when we built models, we would hunt the studio for used cardboard, the corrugated pieces with coffee spilled on them, because it made the models look more real, and it meant that we were not buying clean new materials. Actually, nobody called it circularity then. It was just a studio culture, and it became a habit with time. And now I actually see that the same instinct with my son, who turns the cardboard boxes at home into costumes, swords. Honestly, our home looks a bit like a recycling depot, but the creativity levels are very, very high. So that instinct is also what I fight hardest for in my work as well. Uh, and we need to also think other resources that we need to reuse. Like clearest example is water, because water is simply too valuable to throw away. On the projects I care about most, it's the thing that I am most stubborn about. Like buildings can discharge rainwater, air conditioning, condensate, and gray water as if they had no value at all. For years, I ran calculations and feasibility studies to collect those streams and reuse them so that we can irrigate the landscape through the driest month of July without touching the mains. But putting them in a tank, putting the water in a tank is not the point. If nobody owns the maintenance, the smartest system, the most expensive system can fall quietly. So fall idle. So treating waste as a resource is not just spotting another use. It is designing the whole system that keeps that resource usable over time. Otherwise, it is still waste, just with better publicity.
What I find very interesting in your example is that if we think about the human history, we actually been doing a complete cycle for thousands of years. And it's actually very recently when we went into the high-tech society of the last 50, 60 years that the materials became more complicated, that everything's gained some complexity in the structure, and that we went more and more into a waste society. As before, it was just simply returning to nature or just simply being reduced, as steel has been reused for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And so I find that interesting because in some of the examples you put, in a way, we hear a lot that we want to do some high tech and R&D, but we also do need to do a lot more into low tech because we need some
Yeah.
products that are not as complicated and thought from the beginning that they can be recycled and reused. So it's not just what we've been doing for the last 50 years, but we need also to change the mindset. So instead of asking how something should be discarded, we begin asking how its value can be preserved and recovered in the end life and maybe used some way differently or simply redesigned. But that asks a change of mindset in the way we are designing things. Thank you very much for those very great examples. Let us now explore circularity through the built environment. So, buildings require large amounts of energy, water, and materials. And some of those points you already put some hints into that. But now let's dig a little deeper. Decisions taken during their design and construction can influence the environmental impact for several decades as we build a building not for a couple of years in general, but something that can last decades, if not longer. So, how can circular economy principles be applied to buildings and especially to new buildings? Because if you look at what the Romans or even before did, it was mostly a circular economy already. But the new buildings, we are kind of like rediscovering that part.
Yeah. So, circularity in a building actually starts before you pick a single material. It starts with whether we need to build, demolish, or replace anything at all, as we discussed in the previous questions. I actually think of it as a 5 levels. First, preserve what already exists because the structure holds an enormous amount of material, labor, energy, carbon, and keeping it usually beats demolishing and recycling the pieces. But of course, that can be not an option for every building. So secondly, we need to reduce demand before adding systems like passive design, shading, daylight, and a better envelope means that we can have less equipment and fewer materials, fewer mechanical equipment from the start. Third, we need to design for a long adaptable life, as you also pointed out. So the building can change function and be repaired without major demolition. Even if the function can be changed, it can be a flexible change. Fourth, we need to choose materials that are durable, healthy, and where possible, reusable, and connected so that they can be separated again. Like they have this flexibility. Because like a recyclable panel glued permanently to three others is not really recyclable. And fifth, we need to design the operational loops, as we have discussed, like water, maintenance, repair, material recovery, because circularity cannot stop the day construction ends. This has to happen at the very beginning because once the geometry and structure and the procurement model are fixed, as you also know, most of the biggest opportunities are already locked in. The mindset I try to bring is that a building is not only a consumer of materials because of its nature, it's also a temporary material bank. And we should design it so that one day these materials can leave as cleanly as they arrived. And I want to also be honest about the local reality. For example, in Istanbul, we have large-scale urban renewal precisely because of the earthquake risk. And when there is a safety issue, safety has to come first, of course. But those two things do not conflict, do not have to conflict. Good structural engineering is not about pouring more concrete. It's about putting material exactly where the loads meet and wasting none. So even when we must build new and build strong, we can still be efficient. Circularity here is not keep every old building. It is never a waste structure, and that is completely compatible with keeping people safe, I think.
So if I try to do a follow-up on what you're explaining, at what stage should the circularity be considered? Is it the responsibility of the construction company, of the engineers, of the architect, of the real estate developers? Because coming from a hands-on construction company, I can say that often the ideas of the customers are a bit ludicrous, or they have different dream ideas of what is the hands-on reality. But at the same time, on the reality of what we do, sometimes the scope is too limited and we don't have much of an influence. So from your experience, at what stage should really the circularity be considered, and who actually owns that responsibility?
Yeah. Ideally, the brief and the concept stage, of course, before the budget and structural grid and the geometry are set. The real point is actually who is in the room at that moment. If the sustainability thinking arrives after the architect and the client and the engineers have already fixed the scheme, you are not designing circularity in, you are negotiating it back. So you always lose something. So if we can get it into the brief, get it into the concept stage and consider it with that mindset, circularity mindset, it can cost almost nothing. So as I said before, the construction and the tender phase is very, very late. I think we need to be involved, the circularity needs to be involved in the brief.
Thank you very much. And I think this shows why circularity should be considered from the beginning of a project. And I
Yeah.
think if it's a good design from the beginning, it doesn't mean necessarily that the project is going to be much more expensive. It's just that the design is going to be different. You're going to find some alternative to some of the materials. But from my experience, also in my field, the more we do things in a rush, the less the options we have to keep also the budget into the right scope. And that's when we start doing like the cheapest options or some of the bad options. So the material selected usually happens at the beginning also. That's when you have the concept, and the way a building is designed and its ability to adapt can redetermine how long its value is retained. And I really love this image you have of a kind of like a material bank, because if it's designed well, it's not just going to be at some point like just we destroy it and then we put that in a landfill, but we can actually reuse 80, 90, 95, maybe 98% of the buildings, and really avoid having as little as possible that is real waste at the end.
Yeah.
What is embodied carbon and why should organizations understand that?
Well, embodied carbon is the carbon that is already in the building before we even switch on the lights. It covers extracting the raw materials, making the products, transporting them to construction site, the construction itself, uh, and also replacing things over the building's life and dealing with them at the end, like the demolition part. And the timing is the key point. Operational carbon, you can keep improving year after year with the lower energy and lower natural gas, etc. But embodied carbon is mostly locked in the day you build. The tool we use to see that is life cycle assessment, actually. At product scale, a manufacturer calculates one material across its whole life. And when that result is independently verified, it becomes an EPD. Maybe you have heard that environmental product declaration. And at building scale, we take those product numbers, those documentation, and multiply them by our real quantities and add transport, energy, and end of life to get the footprint of the whole building. There are some international standards, both for products and for whole buildings, that keep everyone measuring the same way. So the numbers are actually comparable. In most of the life cycle assessment I have done, the structure and the facade are the biggest contributors because of the sheer quantity of concrete, steel, aluminum, and glass. But interestingly, interior fit outs can quietly become huge too because they get ripped out and replaced every few years with each new office, each new customer. So the lesson that surprised people most is that the labels we trust can mislead us as well. Like local does not automatically mean low carbon, low embodied carbon. If that local steel is made in a plant running on coal power, or if the
Yes.
recycled scrap is actually trucked in from Romania, if I have this example in Turkey, so the story falls apart. And recycled content does not automatically make a product low carbon or healthy or circular. So no single green label is enough, I think. You have to look at the whole life cycle. This is why we need to treat the LCA as a decision tool, not a compliance report. Its value is finding the hot spots early so that we can change them at that point. And in renovation, especially, it flips the question from what can we remove to what can we keep.
Yeah, thank you very much for those very good point. I like the couple of examples that you brought because I also experimented them in my professional life, and it's true that for some product actually. The transport have a very small footprint in comparison to the real product that you're having. So it's very important to know if you take the example of steel, was it produced by coal or by a hydrogen company or with electricity, and what kind of electricity? It can change a lot actually. And especially since maybe some of the people listening don't know that, but in building, we consider that concrete is about 8% of the CO2 emission worldwide, and the entire real estate is maybe something closer to 35% of the entire CO2 emission worldwide. So if we don't take some real measures there, we will never achieve the targets that we are set. But I like that you put that how the life cycle can really support better decision because you need to take into account the entire flow of the materials. Thank you very much for that. So it also becomes from extracting, manufacturing, transporting, as we said, maintaining, and eventual disposing of its material. So it's really the whole life cycle that we need to see. And that's why also there is some certificates that are capable of doing that. Now we've talked about building in general, so I would be very interested to talk a little bit more into what we have when we are doing some renovation and demolition. So when do you think that a building should be renovated and when should it be demolished? Because that's often a question that there is. Of course, we usually look at the price, But now we are looking at the entire life cycle and the carbon emission. So we are trying to have another parameters that is there to have like better preserve the environment and the earth. So for you, how do you do those you use those criteria?
Well, my short answer is that renovation should be the first question, not the automatic answer. Before anyone decides to demolish, we should look hard at what is already there, the structure, the material, and carbon already invested in it. Whether it can adapt its energy and water performance, the seismic risk, like with earthquake, and the safety of the people using it. Keeping the structure and improving the envelope, the systems, and the layout actually avoids a big share of the emissions and waste of building new. And it keeps something social too, the identity and the continuity of the place. As an architect, I very much emphasize that. But also, I'm careful not to romanticize it because sometimes replacement is the only sense where if a structure is unsafe, if it carries serious hazardous material risk, if it simply cannot meet basic access and health needs, or if fixing it would cost much, much more in whole life terms than starting again. Even then, demolition should not mean blind destruction, I think. You can take it apart selectively, inventory the materials, and recover a lot what is there. Lately, my focus has been public building retrofit actually, where the stakes are higher. A public building is never just an energy asset, it's a service people depend on. You keep it and you keep the carbon and service both running. And that biggest saving is usually decided long before it shows up on an energy bill at the moment we choose not to demolish. And there's a second half to this. The building we design today is the one someone will stand in front of tomorrow asking the same question, renovate or demolish. So my job actually is to make that their answer easy. We inherited buildings, no one designed with us in mind, I think. Unfortunately, maybe some of them, but let us not to do that to people who come after us, even if we are building new.
Very interesting points that you made of yes, extending the life of existing building can preserve materials, reduce waste, and avoid some of the emission associated with new construction. But at the same time, you also put the problem that some of the buildings may not be fit for reuse, for health reasons, for safety reasons. And that brings me to the next section because organization actually needs the right information to evaluate those choices. So many organizations now include circular economy and waste reduction within their sustainability commitments. Commitment doesn't necessarily mean that they are actually using it every day, because actually the real challenge is turning these commitments into decisions that influence design, purchasing, operation, and investment. And in an environment where up to now 80%, 90% of the criteria is money, security, maybe, sometimes health. But when we do circular economy, we are trying to be much broader, and it is also not always everybody that has the skills to do that. So, why do some organizations succeed in circularity while others remain at the commitment stage? From your opinion and your experience.
Yeah, I've been working with a lot of organizations in existing buildings and new buildings. The difference for me is whether circularity stays an ambition or actually becomes part of how the organization makes decisions, as you said. Plenty of organizations have strong commitments, but those commitments never make it in the project brief or the budget or the procurement criteria or the KPIs. So the moment a project comes under cost or time pressure, circularity becomes optional. And it is one of the first things that can be cut. I actually see a recurring pattern. The sustainability team us ask to deliver circular outcomes while the people actually making the purchasing and the design decisions are still judged on lowest upfront cost and program. I think that organization, if it's doing that, is sending two contradictory messages at once. I think this is where leadership matters, but not as an inspiring speech. Real leadership decides who is accountable, puts resources behind it, protect the goal when the trade-offs show up. It also makes circular performance visible in procurement and project reviews, so it cannot quietly disappear. The other issue is that actually people define value differently. Finance wants a return. The facility manager wants durability, reliability, easy maintenance. The architect and designer wants functionality, adaptability, strong user experience, and of course, aesthetically coherent result. The sustainability, on the other hand, is considering, as we discussed, carbon, material use, long-term environmental impact. So circular projects move forward when these different forms of value are discussed early and translated into one shared business case. Honestly, that translation is at the core of my work and will be turning carbon, material, and building performance data into something that finance, design, procurement, and operation can act on, actually.
Okay, so circularity cannot remain only a responsibility of a sustainability team. I think we got that point, that leadership do has a responsibility to make it part of the organization's culture, strategy, and everyday decision making. So let's imagine that the boss is happy, that the designer did their job and everybody. But then we got to a key point is that you have people that are preparing the procurement and how the procurement can really support the circular economy and avoid being taken just by the problem of money and
Yeah,
costs,
yeah,
efficiency.
of course. Procurement is one of the most powerful levers we have because it quietly decides what comes into a building and therefore what eventually becomes waste. The first shift is to stop buying on price alone. Just start looking at the whole life of a thing. How long does it last? What does it cost to clean and maintain? Can the parts be replaced, be repaired? And is there any real route to reuse it or take it back at the end? Sometimes manufacturers can take it at that back. So they need to consider these and evaluate these as well. And when I see the biggest gap is a company have a beautiful sustainability report, ambitious targets, while the building team still buys on lowest upfront cost simply because nobody ever translated those targets into how they actually purchase. In a new project, that means that we need to get the circularity into specs, tender, not just the report. In an existing building, it's everyday buying, like the maintenance works, the cleaning products, the furniture. If a requirement never reaches the contract, it changes nothing actually. In my own work, I have written criteria around things like EPDs, recycled content, healthier, low emitting materials, and supplier take back. On a retail project that meant real circularity, on an airport, it meant EPD-based material choices alongside construction waste recovery. But no single label actually tells the whole story. As I said before, local is not automatically low carbon, and recycled is not automatically healthy or recyclable. And the bar keeps rising, I think. Once a certification is normal, the next questions get deeper. Who made this? Under what conditions? Will its
Mhm.
data still be usable years from now, not just at the point of purchase? So I think procurement can think of it buying less, buying better, and checking it is that was promised actually show up.
Yeah, I find that point very interesting. That means also that the purchase team needs to develop new skills because it's very easy to have a target on how much did you save on purchase, and they say, oh, I saved 20%, so I have a 5% bonus on that. But when you start to see the bigger pictures, you need to have different kind of criteria, and I think that takes a deeper change for the organization to look at really what they are purchasing, but it is a very key element because purchasing decisions determine which products and materials enter an organization, and what may eventually become waste. So the criteria that are put there are very important. And we managed to do some about quality, because then the production team would be angry if the quality is poor, even if the price was cheap. So I think we can do the same thing with circular. It just needs some change. And yeah, change management is always something quite challenging to put into place. But I think circular procurement encourages organization to consider the complete life and value of what they purchase, and not just the price or maybe the quality, but the quality in something, I would say, larger. And so, how can organization measure their progress in reducing waste? Have you some examples that you've put into place that they have some concrete effect in the organization and the company?
Yeah, total waste generated, yeah, is useful, but it's on its own, it can actually mislead. An organization can report a great recycling rate while still buying unnecessary, short-lived, unrepairable things, I think. I would start by separating the hierarchy. How much material did we avoid in the first place? How much did we keep or reuse? How much did we repair? How much did we recycle? Or how much that just went to disposal? Prevention and reuse deserve, I think, their own indicators, so that because they hold far more value than recycling. I would also normalize the numbers. For a building, kilograms of waste per square meter says more than total tons. And for an event, maybe if you are considering, waste per participant can be a number. That way you can compare projects of different sizes fairly. Beyond that, the useful indicators tend to be a few things like the share of existing building kept, the percentage, the share of materials directly reused, virgin material and embodied carbon avoided with our life cycle assessment calculations, for example, and how much mains water was replaced by recovered water. But the trap is creating 20 indicators that nobody uses, I think, because measurement exists to guide a decision. So I would pick a baseline and 3 to 5 indicators maybe tied to the biggest impacts of that specific building. Then pair the numbers with a short note, what changed, why, and whether we can repeat it. The question should be that only not how much waste did we divert, also how much did we avoid creating, and how much value did we keep in use.
Yeah. Find that very interesting what you said, also not to try to have 20 or 30 indicators, because you're just creating paperwork, and it's also annoying people, and usually they are just filling up numbers without being conscious of what they are actually doing. But measurements is important because it helps organization understand where the resources are being lost and used, and where the improvement can be made, and especially also learn for the next building, the next project. But also something that is very important is to allow them to communicate their progress with greater transparency and accountability. And there, as working for a construction company, I also want to stress a point that it is not just about communicating as marketing online, but it becomes more and more important to communicate to your own employees. So if you have some positive things that you can communicate to your employees, that because they did this and this, they had a positive impact, you're creating some enthusiasm in people to keep going in this same direction. So you're creating some positive change as well. And you're also encouraging other people to come work for you, because especially the newest generation, they are very, very keen on those specific aspects. And so it can create some very, very useful data that you can communicate and share to the outside world. So now we are moving to a more, I wouldn't say more important part, but we've talked about the technical part, and now we're moving to people and the organization culture that we have, which is a key element in circularity. Policies, technologies, and technical standards are essential for sure, but circular systems also depend on the people who use them every day. So, how important is human behavior in making circular system work?
Yeah, human behavior is essential, of course, but I try not to blame people for systems that are hard to use. We design something that's technically correct, then assume people will understand it, trust it, maintain it, use it. A building can have separate bins on every floor, but if the collection behind them is not organized, people notice and they stop. It is the same with as I said, the deposit machines I mentioned. The incentive works until the machine is full every time you come, and then people quietly ask, why am I still doing this? So, but behavior can be shaped by if you can see the materials in the first place, I think. So, best circular systems do two things, I think. They make the right action easy and reliable, so it does not depend on willpower. And they help people see the material differently, so they actually want to.
Yeah, I think even a well-designed system can fail when people do not understand its purpose and find it difficult to use, too complex, too long. So at the end, people are people. Circular practices must therefore be practical, accessible, and supported by the organizational culture, and that actually people can feel they can own that system, because otherwise it's becoming very difficult to be implemented and used. So now let's move to something that's at least a part of our audience can be very, very excited about is how we can bring circularity into GCI. So let's now bring the conversation closer to our beloved organization and how GCI local and national organization conduct conferences, training programs, meetings, business events, community projects throughout the world. All these activities involve decisions about material, food, venues, transportation, and of course, purchasing. And so, what circular practices can, could, should GCI introduce in its events and in its operations?
Yeah, the nice thing about events is actually they are small, fast version of the whole problem, I think. So they are a perfect place to practice. Every event is a set of decisions about, as you said, materials, food, venues, transport, purchasing. So I would start with the obvious one, like avoiding the single use. Like we can have the refill stations instead of bottles, reusable cups and tableware, digital programs, like instead of printing the paper itself, or banners with no date so that they can use it next time. But even a well-run event makes some waste. So beyond just how we sort it, we can think of the each material actually goes afterwards. So and I think that has to be arranged before the event, not during. You can partner ahead of time with a local composter, maybe redistribute to surplus food, even send some coffee grounds to someone who turns them into something new. In Turkey, there are some innovative firms for that. The point is to know that the material is next home before it becomes waste, I think. We actually tried a tiny version of this at GCI Maltepe. Around Human Duties Day, we asked people to bring small packaging they would normally just throw out, medicine boxes, food packaging, clean cardboard. And on those pieces, everyone wrote one thing they wanted to see in 2050 and one responsibility they would take today. So I think it become a pile of packaging, become a shared collection of messages, and then it went to recycling. It was mostly an awareness exercise, but the point was before we call something waste, we can pause and ask if it's we can use it in another way. So a truly circular event is three things: planning before, clear responsibilities during, and a quick review after. What did we avoid? What did we reuse? What did we risk go? And what should we do next time?
I will add a fourth one if you allow me. It's
Of
not
course.
going to reduce really the event per se, but I think people, when they move, they go to a conference. It could be a European conference, it could be AMEC, ASPAC. They're going to travel often by plane and they're going to produce a lot of CO2. So if you make the conscious decision you're going to go to such an event, you need to make sure that for you, it's going to bring something so valuable that the trip is worth it. And so I think the organizer, they also have a responsibility to make sure that in the content of the organization, it's not going to be just party, which we all love, but there is also going to be some life-changing part. And on that part, I think the right partners that you can have for such an event can be very important, because some of the right partners, some of the right idea, you're going to bring them home and you can have a tremendous impact in your own organization. And I think this is something that we also need to think is, what are people going to come back after that event? What is going to be something that they can also contribute into that circular part? So yeah, GCI organization make many small decisions through their event and operations, of course, and you've cited at least three main points that they can reduce the footprint and make the organization more circular. When these decisions are improved across thousands of communities, their collective impact can become significant. And I think that's where GCI can really start to have something as a whole organization that becomes a standard that have an impact worldwide. So what circular economy project could GCI introduce in local communities that can have an impact with the livelihood and business opportunities on the local level, and that also can teach the members about the circular economy and have an impact in the local communities?
Yeah, as a new GCI member, I've been thinking about what can we do, of course. Community projects work best when they solve a real local problem and I think build a skill at the same time. So instead of a one-off cleanup, I look for something that keeps running after the event. For example, repair can be a great entry point. There can be a repair cafe where people bring broken electronics, furniture, clothes, and fix them with skilled volunteers. You keep things out of landfill, people save money, and the skill gets passed on. Tool and material libraries also work on the same way. And there can be a neighborhood shares where everyone only needs twice a year. And instead of all buying their own, we can also create something like that. And clothing is another big one because we threw away perfectly good clothes so fast. Children's, especially kids, outgrow them long before they are worn out. Maybe a GCI chapter could set up a local matching system with schools or municipalities, connecting good clothing with families who need the right sizes. And if there are textiles that really are finished, then we can think of, can this become something else like bags or new products? Maybe through a small upcycling workshop with women, maybe. And also, I would also love to see the toy swap days for kids. Like children can bring toys that they have outgrown and swap. My son loves to swap toys, Legos mostly. Donate or sell them maybe as a little entrepreneurs. It keeps things in use and also teach them to value things, share, negotiate, maybe a first taste of entrepreneurship. I think GSI could build the environment around it, like small stalls, tokens, a member mentoring them, maybe asking each child why someone else might love the toy. The same logic covers the what can we use rescue before demolition. And the GSI power, I think, not just collecting unused things, like linking resources, needs, skills, and new opportunities, like a network.
Well, you actually dreamed it, and actually I chaptered this both of the suggestion you have, because in Romania, GCI Cluj actually had a project called Reclothing, and another
Mm.
project called Toy Story, where actually people could bring their clothes, they would be refitted, and then they could be resold or reoffered to people. And same thing with the toys. And so
Yeah,
actually,
I
some
will look
initiatives
up.
actually exist. You can look it up, and if some of the people listening to the podcast, they can actually contact GCI Romania, GCI Cluj, and maybe be inspired and develop that in their own country. So, yes, circular economy project can address environmental challenges while also supporting innovation, skills development, entrepreneurship, and employment. And I think this is very important, because for the future of GCI, we can really use those projects to develop the skills of our members, and GCI can become even more valuable to the community. And this gives GCI an opportunity to connect sustainability with local economic development. And also, I am sure of that, it could develop a lot of business opportunities to connect with companies and maybe to grow new businesses as well. Now, if we look at our members and young leaders, the transition toward a circular economy will require a new generation of leaders who can work across different sectors and disciplines to have like a more general view. So briefly, what skills do young leaders need to advance the circular economy?
I think the most important skill, honestly, is the translation. A circular economy leader has to connect environmental knowledge with business, design, finance, policy, community, and need to move between those languages. Most good circular decisions die because not the idea was wrong, but because no one could explain it in the language of the person holding the budget, for example. So I would tell someone starting out, go deep in one technical area that you are credible or educated, whether that is materials, energy, or waste. But then deliberately learn to speak finance or policy. Learn systems thinking. I think it's very important because in circularity, nothing is a single use. You cannot fix energy without touching ventilation or water without touching hygiene. So build real communication skills because your job is to turn a technical truth, technical jargon into a decision someone actually makes. And the last thing, I think curiosity without cynicism. This field is genuinely hard as I've been working for 10 years now, more than 10 years, and it's easy to become either naively optimistic or bitterly disillusioned. The people who last stay honest about the difficulty and keep looking for the leverage point anyway and keep pushing. My own path ran through architecture, permaculture, even child development, and every one of those lenses turned out to be very, very useful actually. So do not be afraid of an unusual combination. It's often where you see that what specialists miss, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I think it's also very important to be able to communicate technical information in ways that can inspire the practical decisions. Do that translation is quite important. We are almost to the end. So now I want to move to final questions. Asia, before we conclude in one sentence, what message would you leave with young leaders about seeing waste as a resource?
Yeah, I think stop asking only where the waste goes. Start asking why it was created in the first place, because the most circular decisions are the ones that keep value in use before it ever becomes waste. That can be my final
Very good.
sentence.
Asia,
Yeah.
thank you so much for taking the time and thank you for sharing your valuable knowledge, practical experience, and perspective with the GCI Global community. Today's conversation has shown us that waste is not simply something to manage after it has been created. Waste is often the result of decisions made much earlier during design, purchasing, production, construction, and of course, consumption. The circular economy invites us to redesign these decisions. It encourages us to preserve the value of materials, extend the life of products and buildings, reduce unnecessary consumption, and recover resources that would otherwise be lost. We have also learned that circularity is not achieved through recycling alone. It requires life cycling thinking, sustainable procurement, meaningful measurement, supportive leadership, and the active participation of people and a capacity to understand the system and the organization they are a part of and also why they are doing it. And for GCI members and young leaders in more general, the opportunity is clear. We can examine the resources used in our events, our organizations. We can support repair, reuse, and responsible consumption within our communities. We can engage businesses and government in creating stronger local systems. And most importantly, we can begin treating waste not as an inevitable outcome, but as evidence that something can be redesigned. To everyone watching us live and catching up later, we encourage you to take the knowledge from today's conversation and turn it into practical action within your organization, profession, and community. On behalf of Junior Chamber International and the 2026 GCI Sustainability Commission, thank you for joining us for this interview as part of the GCI Sustain 360 48 Hours Race to Sustainability. I am Amael Aubert from GCI Switzerland. Let us lead, connect, and evolve for a sustainable future.